Aman, I don't think I would have found it in a classical game. That is inhuman.
There are 3 things that make this move extra special. First off, Magnus Carlsen was playing against Hikaru Nakamura, the best bullet chess player in the world. Second off, yes, this is bullet chess, and Carlsen finds this move, this concept, on seconds. And third off, it's the only winning move in the position. This is an immense game, played in the Speed Chess Championship Final 2023. I'm dissecting this match over the weeks and months, so smash subscribe if you love these kind of videos, and this game is special. More commentary reaction to come. So Hikaru kicks off with e4. Magnus goes for a Sicilian. We get knight f3, knight c6, the bishop developing, eyeballing the king, e6 blunts the diagonal, castles, a6, always a useful move, and now Hikaru expands in the centre here. Classic open Sicilian. The knight recaptures. Magnus sticks his knight there. Why is he blocking his bishop? What's this all about? Well, after Hikaru goes bishop e3, we see an exchange on d4, bishop recaptures, and this is Magnus's point. He hits this bishop and Hikaru should retreat to e3. That is the proper square for the bishop, right? But he goes c3 and watch the fun and games he now has with this piece. Not where it belongs. So b5 expands. Magnus kicks back that bishop and then kicks back the second bishop to d2. Bishop b7, rapid development for the world blitz champion. We get a3 from Hikaru. He's desperate to break out from the bind. Needs to get this knight into the game. Magnus reinforces the pawn. c3, Hikaru insistent upon breaking out, and Magnus just calmly developing. He doesn't want to help Hikaru, so takes on b4 played. The a-pawn recaptures. We see a set of rooks coming off the board. Queen recaptures. And finally, this bishop lands on the square where it belongs, spraying out in both directions. Now it's a good piece, but Hikaru's lost time. And look at this now for some tricky Magnus stuff. He doesn't castle, standard stuff. He goes queen b8. And look at the counterplay here that he wants to drum up down the b file in response to an attack that white wants to mount upon the king. So bishop c2, this is what Hikaru's looking for. Eyeballing the black monarch. If it castles, which Magnus does. c4 now played. Hikaru wants to shut down Magnus's queenside counterplay over here, but Magnus comes up with a cracker of a move in a bullet chess game. He insists on playing on the queen side with pawn to b3. It's a sacrifice. Hikaru takes. He's got to do that. And knight a5 is Magnus's point. In one move, he springs this Springer interaction, the Springer as they'd say in German, right? And opens this sniper, firing at the center here. So knight d2 covers all of these points. Finally, this miserable piece enters the game, but bishop c6 and the pressure's intensifying. Queen c2, Hikaru's one move away from activating that rook. Then you'd have a nice cannon defending the b2 pawn, so Magnus pounces. Takes on b3. You've got to recapture with the queen. If you go with the knight, well, you walk into a very nasty pin. So this is forced, and what does Magnus do? Of course, he takes the ladies off the board. He's made a career on this stuff, playing in the end game, and rook b8. He's just in time to attack the knight, force it to move, and then pick up a pawn. Now he's got a choice, the b2 pawn with the rook, or the e4 pawn with the bishop. He makes the right choice, takes this one. If you'd captured here, well, the knight was going to shatter your structure, pick up the bishops over there. So b3 played. The pawn now supported by the knight. But what does Magnus do? Remove the piece that's defending the pawn with e5. The knight stumbling backwards. And watch Magnus now, how he masterfully just starts to unravel his pieces here. Activate them. He starts with f6, supporting the center. Knight d2. Hikaru hits the bishop, also defends his pawn. Bishop d3 played, the rook slides to d1, and Magnus brings the king into the game. It's what you've got to do in the endgame. c5 from Hikaru, expanding, looking to activate the knight here. We get rook b5, attacking the weakened pawn, rook c1 defends, and now f5 looks for f4 to remove a defender of the pawn. So f3 played, gives the bishop some retreat room. Magnus goes rook a5, looking to activate down there, and Hikaru decides he's got to go for some play against the black rook center. So he jumps with knight c4, forking those two pieces. Therefore, this one's forced. Magnus takes, it is the best move. Now he goes f4 here, and not only is he trying to get this bishop to retreat, but he's set a trap. Because if you come to f2, the most natural move to look after the pawn, well, you can see this evaluation bar reacting. It shows that black's winning because you check and the king, whoops, not that one, check down here. The king can't actually move, right? So you have to start giving up a piece, a bishop or a rook, and of course, black is winning. So the bishop can't retreat. The best move for white here is actually b4, picking up a tempo on the rook and covering this pawn. And if check, there's bishop c1 covering, supported by the rook. It's nice stuff, but you don't always see that in bullet, right? So Hikaru goes bishop d2 here, and Magnus picks up a pawn. He's a pawn to the good, but watch how Hikaru fights back into the game now. It sets up this tense finish. So king f1 played, rook b5 targets the pawn, b4 therefore played, we get king e6, king e2, Magnus starts expanding with his pawns, bishop c3, d5 played, the rook gives a check, bishop d6 blocking that check, and rook a6 looking for some play along this rank here. So e4 from Magnus, steamrolling through the center. He sets up the classic bathtub formation, one of my personal favorites. g4 from Hikaru now, nice idea. Sure, you can take, but after pawn recaptures, the bishop can't take, it's pinned to the king. This is Hikaru's idea. You can take here, king supports. Taking was playable, but not best. Instead, Magnus goes for king d7. Best move, breaking the pin. He's the endgame goat. Hikaru checks. King c6. This pawn is dead meat if Hikaru wants to take it, but he doesn't do it. Then the b4 pawn starts collapsing. The king's marching in fast. Hikaru's trying to assess it. He doesn't love it. So instead, he checks. We see the rooks come off the board here. King recaptures, and now bishop f6. This is Hikaru's idea. Magnus's pawns on dark squares. They're weak for attack. And if h6, bishop g7. The mop-up job continues. So Magnus doesn't do it. He activates the king. Yes, this pawn drops, but the king takes here, and it's marching into the position. h4. Hikaru wants to create a passed pawn of his own. King c3, h5, d4, f takes on e4, forced, but now Magnus has a winning concept and he misses it. They are so low on time here. He should go king c2. You've rolled out the red carpet, and white just can't stop this pawn from going through in any sensible way. You know, the bishop just can't get back around in time because this first move is coming with check. That is a winning continuation. Magnus misses it. He plays the immediate d3 check. The king stumbles back to d1, and it now blockades that pawn. It's game on because f3, sure, Magnus running, but bishop covers from e3. Bishop f4, nice decoy from Magnus. Take me, I run the pawn. So of course that wasn't played. Bishop f2. d2 on the board from Magnus, but now e5 distracts this bishop. Hikaru so resourceful. g5 comes. This is the point. You're no longer covering the square with the bishop. We get king d3, g6 played, and now this is the moment. This is where Magnus, on seconds, as you can see on the left, finds the only winning move here. So if you want to test your endgame prowess, see if you can play like Magnus Carlsen, then do pause, look for the best move here. So what does Magnus play? He goes for the excellent pawn to h6. And this is where we get the reaction from Daniel.
Aman, I don't think I would have found h6 in a classical game. That is inhuman to leave the protected passer on g3.
Now, why is this so good? Well, we're going to see why. Because after bishop b6 from Hikaru, waiting, we get bishop c3 from Magnus to cover this pawn. Now bishop f2, you have to stay on this diagonal, keep an eye on this pawn push, and king e4 from Magnus. He starts bringing the king over this way. Now king c2 is played in the game, but here's the critical thing to consider. What if these pawns were no longer on the board because there'd been an exchange earlier and Hikaru therefore pushed this one now? Well, Magnus would be forced to capture. Now the king takes here, and with these pawns gone, it's just a dead draw. Because even if the bishops come off the board, something like this, well, the king would just march in front of the pawn here. And, okay, sorry, this position isn't a dead draw. You actually lose because the king comes in. So taking here wouldn't be best. But the point I'm trying to make is the bishops can disappear as long as the king sits in front of the pawn here and keeps the opposition on the black king. It's a well-known theoretical draw. You cannot dislodge that king. You'll end up forcing a stalemate. But don't you love when you're trying to make a point and it gets ruined by the particulars of a variation? But that's the basic idea. You have to have these pawns on the board. However, in the game, king c2 now played because of Magnus's threat to march over and the h-pawns are still on. And now after king f4, bishop c5, king g3, look at the huge problems. You can't take here, this one runs through, this is about to push. Obviously Hikaru does this, his only chance. Magnus now takes, yes this one drops, but king g2 and the f-pawn's running. Now after king d3 you can immediately push, but Magnus doesn't do it. He just sets it up. A few more moves. We get to this position and Hikaru throws in the towel, resigns the game. Why does he do it? Well, how do you stop the pawn? King's nowhere, sure you can come here, but it's just marching. If you bring the bishop and exchange them, well, fine. Here, okay, maybe you wouldn't play that, you'd go here, or you'd say push the pawn, but the pawn goes through, you're just too late, you can do this, that one's getting picked up, then you checkmate the king. Really an exceptional endgame skill from Magnus Carlsen on seconds. And if you loved this video, smash subscribe to never miss a future one, and check out the video on screen for another epic game from this final championship match. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Cheers.